Pope Clement VII, born Giulio di Giuliano de' Medici, was pope from the 19th of November 1523 to his death in 1534. The sack of Rome and English Reformation occurred during his papacy. Early life. Giulio de' Medici was born in Florence 1 month after the assassination of his father, Giuliano de' Medici, following the papacy conspiracy. Although his parents had not had a formal marriage, they had been formally betrothed per sponsalia de presenti, and therefore canon law recognized that Giulio was born legitimate. Despite this accommodation for an important and powerful family, Giulio was considered illegitimate by his contemporaries. He was the nephew of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who educated him in his youth. Giulio's mother, Fioretta Gorini, also died, leaving him an orphan. Giulio was enrolled in the Knights Hospital and made Grand Prior of Capua. On the death of Archbishop Cosimo de' Pazzi, Giulio was named Archbishop of Florence on the 9th of May 1513, a post he held until his own election as Pope on the 19th of November 1523. Cardinalate. On the 23rd of September 1513, he was created a cardinal by Leo X, and on the 29th of September was appointed Cardinal Deacon of Santa Maria in Dominica, which had been vacated by the election of his cousin the Pope. On the 26th of June 1517 he was created Cardinal Priest of S. Clemente, and shortly thereafter, on the 6th of July 1517, he moved to San Lorenzo in Damaso. He was ordained a priest on the 19th of December 1517, and consecrated bishop 2 days later. Cardinal de' Medici soon became a powerful figure in Rome. Upon his cousin's accession to the papacy, Giulio became his principal minister and confidant, especially in the maintenance of the Medici interest at Florence as Archbishop of that city. In 1517 he conducted his first diocesan synod in Florence. On the 14th of February 1515, Cardinal de' Medici was named Archbishop of Narbonne on the nomination of King Francis I of France. He ruled the diocese through a vicar general. He bestowed upon the Cathedral of S. just a picture of S. Lazare, the original of which he had commissioned from Raphael. He decided to keep the original, however, and an alternative version was made for Narbonne by Sebastiano del Piombo. At the same time as he was named Archbishop, Cardinal Giulio was granted the Abbey of Cito. He held these offices until he was elected Pope. The Venetian ambassador at the papal court, Marco Minio, reported to the Senate of the Most Serene Republic in 1520 that Cardinal de' Medici, nephew, who is not legitimate, has great power with the Pope. He is a man of great competence and great authority. He resides with the Pope, and does nothing of importance without first consulting him. But he is returning to Florence to govern the city. He had the credit of being the main director of papal policy during the whole of Leo X's pontificate, especially as Cardinal Protector of England. Between the 7th of June 1521 and the 26th of September 1522, he was Apostolic Administrator of the Diocese of Worcester. On that date the Pope appointed Hieronymus Giannucci, who was expelled from the see in 1535 as a foreigner by the legislation of Henry VIII. Election. At Leo X's death in 1521, Cardinal Medici was considered especially papabile in the protracted conclave. Although unable to gain the papacy for himself or his ally Alessandro Farnese, he took a leading part in determining the unexpected election of the short-lived Pope Adrian VI, with whom he also wielded formidable influence. Following Adrian VI's death on the 14th of September 1523, Medici overcame the opposition of the French king and finally succeeded in being elected Pope Clement VII in the next conclave. Pope Leo brought to the papal throne a high reputation for political ability and possessed in fact all the accomplishments of a wily diplomat. However, he was considered by his contemporaries as worldly and indifferent to the perceived dangers of the Protestant Reformation by the people of the papacy. At his accession, Clement VII sent the Archbishop of Capua, Nicolaus von Schönberg, to the kings of France, Spain, and England, in order to bring the Italian war to an end. An early report from the protonotary Marino Ascanio Carriacolo to the emperor records, as the Turks threatened to conquer Christian states, it seems to him that it is his first duty as pope to bring about a general peace of all Christian princes, and he begs him, as the firstborn son of the Church, to aid him in this pious work. But the pope's attempt failed. Continental and Medici politics. Francis I of France's conquest of Milan in 1524, during his Italian campaign of 1524 to 1525, prompted the Pope to quit the imperial Spanish side and to ally himself with other Italian princes, including the Republic of Venice, and France in the January of 1525. This treaty granted the definitive acquisition of Parma and Piacenza for the Papal States, the rule of Medici over Florence and the free passage of the French troops to Naples. This policy in itself was sound and patriotic, but Clement VII's zeal soon cooled by his want of foresight and unseasonable economy. He laid himself open to an attack from the turbulent Roman barons, which obliged him to invoke the mediation of the Emperor Charles V. 1 month later, however, Francis I was crushed and imprisoned in the Battle of Pavia, and Clement VII veered back to his former engagements with Charles V, signing an alliance with the Viceroy of Naples. But he was to change sides again when Francis I was freed after the Treaty of Madrid. The Pope entered into the League of Cognac together with France, Venice, and Francesco II Sforza of Milan. Clement VII issued an invective against Charles V, who in reply defined him a wolf instead of a shepherd, menacing the summoning of a council about the Lutheran question. Like his cousin Pope Leo X, Clement was considered too generous to his Medici relatives, draining the Vatican treasuries. This included the assignment of positions all the way up to cardinal, lands, titles, and money. These actions prompted reform measures after Clement's death to help prevent such excessive nepotism. Evangelization. In his bull, Intra Arcana, Clement VII gave a grant of permissions and privileges to Charles V and the Spanish Empire, which included patronage power over the colonies in the Americas. Sack of Rome. The Pope's wavering politics also caused the rise of the imperial party inside the Curia. Cardinal Pompeo Colonna's soldiers pillaged Vatican Hill and gained control of the whole of Rome in his name. The humiliated Pope promised therefore to bring the Papal States to the imperial side again. But soon after, Colonna left the siege and went to Naples, not keeping his promises and dismissing the cardinal from his charge. From this point on, Clement VII could do nothing but follow the fate of the French party to the end. Soon he found himself alone in Italy too, as Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, had sided with the imperial army, allowing the horde of landsknechts led by Charles III, Duke of Bourbon, and Georg von Frensburg to reach Rome without harm. Charles of Bourbon died while mounting a ladder during the short siege, and his starving troops, unpaid and left without a guide, felt free to ravage Rome from the 6th of May 1527. The many incidents of murder, rape, and vandalism that followed ended the splendors of Renaissance Rome forever. Clement VII, who had displayed no more resolution in his military than in his political conduct, was shortly afterwards obliged to surrender himself together with the Castel Sant'Angelo, where he had taken refuge. He agreed to pay a ransom of 400,000 ducati in exchange for his life. Conditions included the cession of Parma, Piacenza, Civitavecchia, and Modena to the Holy Roman Empire. At the same time, Venice took advantage of his situation to capture Servia and Ravenna, while Sigismondo Malatesta returned in Rimini. Clement was kept as a prisoner in Castel Sant'Angelo for 6 months. After having bought off some imperial offices, he escaped disguised as a peddler and took shelter in Orvieto and then in Viterbo. He came back to a depopulated and devastated Rome only in October 1528. Meanwhile, in Florence, Republican enemies of the Medici took advantage of the chaos to again expel the Pope's family from the city. In June of the next year, the warring parties signed the Peace of Barcelona. The Papal States regained some cities, and Charles V agreed to restore the Medici to power in Florence. In 1530, after an 11-month siege, the Tuscan city capitulated, and Clement VII installed his illegitimate nephew Alessandro as duke. Subsequently, the Pope followed a policy of subservience to the emperor, endeavoring on the one hand to induce him to act with severity against the Lutherans in Germany, and on the other to avoid his demands for a general council. English Reformation. By the late 1520s, King Henry VIII wanted to have his marriage to Charles's aunt Catherine of Aragon annulled. The couple's sons died in infancy, threatening the future of the Tudor dynasty, although Henry did have a daughter, Mary Tudor. Henry claimed that this lack of a male heir was because his marriage was blighted in the eyes of God. Catherine had been his brother's widow, but the marriage had been childless, thus the marriage was not against Old Testament law, which forbids only such unions if the brother had children. Moreover, a special dispensation from Pope Julius II had been given to allow the wedding. Henry argued that this had been wrong and that his marriage had never been valid. In 1527, Henry asked Pope Clement to annul the marriage, but the Pope refused. According to Catholic teaching, a validly contracted marriage is indivisible until death, and thus the Pope cannot annul a marriage on the basis of a canonical impediment previously dispensed. Many people close to Henry wished simply to ignore the Pope, but in October 1530 a meeting of clergy and lawyers advised that the English Parliament could not empower the Archbishop of Canterbury to act against the Pope's prohibition. In Parliament, Bishop John Fisher was the Pope's champion. Henry subsequently underwent a marriage ceremony with Anne Boleyn, in either late 1532 or early 1533. The marriage was made easier by the death of the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Warham, a stalwart friend of the Pope, after which Henry persuaded Clement to appoint Thomas Cranmer, a friend of the Boleyn family, as his successor. The Pope granted the papal bulls necessary for Cranmer's promotion to Canterbury, and he also demanded that Cranmer take the customary oath of allegiance to the Pope before his consecration. Laws made under Henry already declared that bishops would be consecrated even without papal approval. Cranmer was consecrated while declaring beforehand that he did not agree with the oath he would take. Cranmer was prepared to grant the annulment of the marriage to Catherine as Henry required. The Pope responded to the marriage by excommunicating both Henry and Cranmer from the Catholic Church. Consequently, in England, in the same year, the Act of First Fruits and Tenths transferred the taxes on ecclesiastical income from the Pope to the English Crown. The Pence Act outlawed the annual payment by landowners of 1 penny only to the Pope. This act also reiterated that England had no superior under God, but only your grace, and that Henry's imperial crown had been diminished by the unreasonable and uncharitable usurpations and exactions of the Pope. Ultimately, Henry led the English Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy that established the independent Church of England and breaking from the Catholic Church. Appearance. During his half-year imprisonment in 1527, Clement VII grew a full beard as a sign of mourning for the sack of Rome. This was in contradiction to Catholic canon law, which required priests to be clean-shaven. However, it had the precedent of the beard which Pope Julius II had worn for 9 months in 1511–12 as a similar sign of mourning for the loss of the papal city of Bologna. Unlike Julius II, however, Clement VII kept his beard until his death in 1534. His example in wearing a beard was followed by his successor, Paul III, and indeed by 24 popes who followed him, down to Innocent XII, who died in 1700. Clement VII was thus the unintentional originator of a fashion that lasted well over a century. Death and character. In 1533, Johann Widmanstetter, a secretary of Pope Clement VII, explained the Copernican system to the Pope and 2 cardinals. The Pope was so pleased that he gave Widmanstetter a valuable gift. Towards the end of his life, Clement VII once more gave indications of a leaning towards a French alliance. His plans to ally the House of Medici with the French royal family bore fruit in the betrothal of the Pope's niece, Catherine de' Medici, to Henry, the son of King Francis I. Before setting out, the Pope issued a bull on September 3, giving instructions as to what was to be done in the event that he died outside Rome. In September of 1534, the Pope set out for France to solemnize the marriage. The marriage took place in Marseille on October 28. On November 7, in Marseille, Pope Clement created 4 new cardinals, all 4 of them French. He held private meetings with both Francis I and Charles V, but not with all 3 together. He returned to Rome on the 10th of December, complaining of stomach problems, and showing a fever. This was not a new illness. The Pope had been so ill at the beginning of August that Cardinal Agostino Trivulzio wrote to King Francis that the Pope's doctors had begun to fear that the Pope was in danger of dying. On the 23rd of September, Clement wrote a long letter of farewell to Charles V. He died on the 25th of September, 1534, having lived 56 years and 4 months, and having reigned for 10 years, 10 months, and 7 days. It has been said that he died from eating poisonous mushrooms, but the symptoms and length of illness do not fit this theory, nor do they account for the effects on his illness of 2 sea voyages within 2 months. In the words of his biographer Emanuele Rodochinacci, in accordance with the custom of those times, people attributed his death to poison. His body was interred at Peter's Basilica, and later transferred to a permanent tomb in the choir of Santa Maria sopra Minerva. As for the arts, Clement VII is remembered for having been the patron of Benvenuto Cellini. He also ordered, just a few days before his death, Michelangelo's painting of the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel.